Can you actually kill those fishermen without due process? So the answer to the question is yes. I can cite the Constitution, just as Scott did.
If you go and say that those were members of Al-Qaeda or ISIS coming to our shores with enough drugs or enough ammunition to kill 1,000, 100,000 Americans, wouldn't you expect our commander-in-chief to take action to stop that? That's what's happening here. That is what's happened, by the way. That's what happens in every war zone, whether you go to Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Somalia. Go there. Let's talk about it.
Give me one name of one individual that you can compare to Al-Qaeda coming through that had enough fentanyl to kill all these Americans. Can you name one?
Let's go to what these drug boats are talking about, which is that we are actively ensuring that the war on drugs that we've been doing for 50 years, which has not worked one single day.
Yeah, we can agree on that.
In today's video, Bakari Sellers destroys Katie Miller on CNN's Newsnight with Abby Phillip. Things heat up immediately as Bakari Sellers presses Katie Miller on the real issues MAGA keeps dodging: Trump's attacks on the Constitution, the growing authoritarian tone of his revenge tour, and the chaos inside the GOP that even former Trump officials are now warning about. While Katie Miller leans on deflection, Bakari Sellers sticks to the facts, making it clear that these aren't just political disagreements, they're real threats to the rule of law and basic democratic norms. So let's dive in and watch how Bakari Sellers shuts down Katie Miller on CNN's Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
All right, so Scott, I'll let you respond to that because, I mean, obviously he feels strongly, but it's also in the context of Trump just coming off of a threat that these lawmakers should be tried for treason, and then he endorsed the idea that they could be hung for their alleged crimes. So there is a lot of retribution and violence coming from the president.
Well, he's plenty mad about that video that they put out, raising the idea that he's issued illegal orders. And in the days that follow, they went on television and were asked directly, what illegal orders? And nobody could name any. And one of them, that's supposed to be the smart moderate, Alyssa Slotkin, started citing Hollywood movies as the rationale for the video. So it seems pretty crazy to me that Democrats would raise the prospect of illegal orders and not be able to name any. Venezuela, look, there's a lot of differences of opinion out there. And on Comey and James, it wasn't about the merits of the case. It was about the appointment of the prosecutor, which is a different thing. But beyond all of that, my rebuttal to this is that the U.S. Constitution has been serving us quite well for 250 years, and there are remedies for everything in the Constitution. But the number one remedy for any political issue in America is called an election. And we just had one in November, and I think there's certain people that haven't gotten over it.
I actually agree with Scott's conclusion. I mean, I don't think that the Constitution is not built for Donald Trump. I do think elections happen. Elections have consequences. I mean, I was just looking at a Pew poll recently talking about how Hispanic voters are now having buyer's remorse. You see Aiden Ross, you see a litany of young voters, young, particularly white male voters who are saying, this is not what I voted for. So yeah, I mean, let's not give Trump too much credit for the havoc that he's causing. If we go to the specific examples that you named, is it unconstitutional to nuke those individuals who are traveling in the Caribbean? The answer is definitely yes. Are those United States senators who are doing their job, are they protected by the First Amendment? Yes. And the Uniform Code of Military Justice? Yes. And then I would love for my Republicans and conservatives at the table, there's no question if you have to put Mark Kelly's military record up against Donald Trump, I mean, there's no question who admirably served our country, and the other person's Donald Trump. The problem Democrats have, is that we have to make that argument to the American public. And why I love Donald Trump going on these tangents is because nobody in the White House can fix the problems at hand. Affordability is the number one issue in this country, and they are tripping over themselves doing all this other stuff, and the American public, they realize it.
Well, I served in the Pentagon under Secretary Robert Gates, who was a Republican in a Democratic administration, and that was something that we used to do back then and actually have bipartisanship throughout an administration. And that was the clearest example I had working with our men and women in the armed forces, was this idea of principle and values. And we even had conversations about how to make sure that war was the last resort. And Secretary Gates was famous for saying that if we don't do enough on the diplomacy and the human rights and the development side, then yes, you will have to buy me more ammunition. That is what he said to the Senate and to leaders who are ultimately responsible for declarations of war and interventions. Now, I will blame Congress for this. You can't complain about not having power when you've given it all away, right? That's happened on the national security side of giving more and more war powers and authority to the president and not having it sit with Congress.
Let me play a little bit.
Bakari Sellers and Nayera Haq are pointing to patterns that go way beyond just political disagreements. This isn't about left versus right. It's about whether the basic guardrails of American democracy still work when a president openly flirts with authoritarian behavior. And frankly, history backs them up. When Scott Jennings leans on the Constitution as if it's an automatic safety net, it ignores what legal scholars, from conservative judges to Trump-appointed officials, have been warning for years. Institutions aren't self-executing. They only work when leaders respect the limits of their own power. The last decade has tested that, and many of those limits held only because individual people stepped in, not because the system magically enforced itself. And on the national security side, Nayera Haq hits on something that's been documented by the Pentagon itself. When Congress hands more war-making authority to the executive, it creates exactly the kind of imbalance Trump thrived on. Just look at the Government Accountability Office reports after the Soleimani strike. Congress wasn't even briefed properly. That's not a partisan critique. That's oversight collapsing in real time. Even the idea of the election being the remedy falls apart when you remember that Trump tried to overturn the last one. The Constitution doesn't fix that by itself. It relies on norms, peaceful transitions, rule of law, civilian control of the military. Those norms were stressed harder in a single term than in decades of US foreign policy challenges. Bakari Sellers and Nayera Haq aren't exaggerating the stakes. If anything, they're giving the reality more credit than Scott Jennings wants to admit.
More from Ty Cobb, because he addressed that very thing also in that interview. Listen.
Trump has neutered Congress. Actually, they've probably neutered themselves through their cowardice and greed. But they have, ceded basically all control to the president, and he dictates everything Mike Johnson does.
The co-equal branches of government that are supposed to be functioning right now, what Ty Cobb is arguing, what a lot of people would argue, is that it's not really functioning quite that way. And even now, we've talked about this a bit, but Republicans in Congress are also feeling like they are being treated like carpet as opposed to like a co-equal branch of government. So is the Constitution really functioning the way it's supposed to be in this moment?
When Democrats shut down the government for a period of almost 2 months, what do you expect will happen when you grind things to a halt and one party holds another party hostage over something that didn't even end up happening in the end? I want to go back to something that Bakari said. He said that those orders that were given, the drug boats in Venezuela, were illegal. Can you cite those statutes, please?
Yes, because it's actually called the Due Process Clause of the United States of America. Because can you point to one of those boats that actually had drugs on them? Do you know that? Do you know about the Trinidadians who were killed innocently, who were just fishermen? Can you actually kill those fishermen without due process? So the answer to the question is yes. I can cite the Constitution, just as Scott did.
If you go and say that those were members of Al Qaeda or ISIS coming to our shores with enough drugs or enough ammunition to kill 100,000 Americans, wouldn't you expect our commander-in-chief to take action to stop that? That's what's happening here. That is what's happened, by the way. That's what happens in every war zone, whether you go to Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Somalia. Go there. Let's talk about it.
Give me one name of one individual that you can compare to Al Qaeda coming through that had enough fentanyl to kill all these Americans. Can you name one?
Let's go to what these drug boats are talking about, which is that we are actively ensuring that the war on drugs that we've been doing for 50 years, which has not worked one single day.
Yeah, right? We can agree on that.
It hasn't been successful one day. So wouldn't you want our country to try something different? You talked about elections and why they're important. In 2024, President Trump won and beat Kamala Harris under stopping the war on drugs, under stopping the entrance of illegal drugs into our country, under stopping the surge of illegal immigration into our country. And that's exactly what he's done.
Can I just put a fine point on this?
Yeah, go
ahead. Just really quickly. I think that my point maybe differs from yours, which is fine. But I believe that individuals deserve some modicum of due process. And I think that is something that's enshrined in our Constitution. If you have some facts that you wanted to tell the audience tonight about the individuals that you know that were brought in or bringing in, and maybe if we arrested them, maybe if we actually saw what was going on, maybe if there wasn't an ulterior motive, because what I do know, And I think you know this as well, that there were innocent Trinidadians who were just on a fishing boat who died as a result of that. I know that they're military members that swore an oath to this country who now have a problem with that. So I
think you're cherry-picking facts.
It's hard not to recognize that Bakari Sellers is standing on solid constitutional and historical ground. The idea that the executive branch can simply label something a threat and bypass due process isn't just controversial, it's the exact kind of overreach that US courts have repeatedly slapped down. Look at Hamdi v. Rumsfeld and Boumediene v. Bush. Even in cases involving suspected terrorists, the Supreme Court ruled that the government must provide some form of due process before using lethal force or indefinite detention. If that's true for alleged enemy combatants, it's definitely true for people in fishing boats who haven't been proven to be engaged in drug trafficking. There's also a well-documented pattern in US counter-narcotics operations of misidentifying targets. The Government Accountability Office reported multiple cases where surveillance was insufficient or flawed, leading to civilian deaths in Latin America. One infamous example, the 2001 Peru shoot-down involving the CIA, which killed an American missionary and her infant after being wrongly labeled a drug smuggler. Mistakes like that are exactly why due process exists, and Katie Miller's framing ignores another hard fact. The war on drugs has never reduced trafficking at the source. The State Department and DEA have said for decades that supply-side crackdowns don't work. Cartels simply replace intercepted shipments or reroute them. It's basic economics. Demand stays high, so supply adapts. So when Bakari talks about the dangers of unchecked executive power, he's echoing what courts, historians, and even national security insiders have been warning for years.
And the other part is that, I mean, we also know that the United States did have some of these people in custody, and rather than actually try them, which we have done in the past, we let them go. We also don't know, they've never said explicitly what drugs are being carried on these boats, but the fentanyl, we know, is not coming from Venezuela.
It's not
the issue here is about the legality and about what happens when there is a system that doesn't contemplate whether things are legal or not. And the British seem to think that there might be things in our actions in the Caribbean that are illegal. We've had a top military officer resign from his post, retired years early. So there are some indications here that people are not comfortable with the legality of what's going on here.
And I will say,
at least in this instance.
This is, like many other things the Trump administration is doing, is blowing a massive hole through what were already gaps in the system. I mean, even in the Obama administration, the George Bush administration, going back to the start of the war on terror, people were uncomfortable with how wide open, if you said, we're going to designate this a terrorist organization. That now gives us war powers that don't have to go through Congress, and we're allowed to use drone strikes, and we're allowed to use rendition. These are serious ethical questions the military has been wrestling with for 20 plus years. On top of that, the United States, because of its power, has been able to get away with and keep itself out of things like the UN legal systems, about the Rome Statute, or any of the criminal court stuff, which is, again, the U.S. protecting itself. Ultimately, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and what may now be Venezuela, the United States has done a great job of making sure that other countries are not able to hold the U.S. accountable.
What's striking in this exchange is that both Abby Phillip and Nayera Haque are tapping into real concerns that national security experts, military lawyers, and human rights organizations have been warning about for decades. Abby's point about legality isn't just theoretical. Multiple U.S. military JAG officers have resigned or blown the whistle over similar issues in the past. During the early 2000s, Navy lawyers raised alarms about targeted killings and detentions that bypassed established legal frameworks, arguing that vague designations and secretive decision-making created massive gray zones. That's almost exactly what's resurfacing now in the Caribbean. At the same time, Nayera's broader argument about how these gaps didn't start with Trump is absolutely backed by history. The authorization for use of military force passed after 9/11 has been stretched so far that presidents from both parties have used it as legal cover for strikes in countries Congress never specifically authorized. Even CENTCOM commanders have acknowledged that the legal basis for some operations is extremely thin, especially when the targets aren't clearly tied to terrorism. And there's an international dimension both women are hinting at. Allies have increasingly questioned US actions because the US never ratified the Rome Statute, which means it avoids jurisdiction from the International Criminal Court. That lack of external accountability creates the exact conditions where questionable military actions can persist without real oversight. So when Abiy emphasizes legality and Nayera highlights the long-term systemic rot, they're both pointing toward the same uncomfortable truth. The legal guardrails have been eroding for years, and now we're seeing the consequences. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing, and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.